speaking to you. So
yeah. The greatest director of all time.
your head level. Okay, where were we? We were back. We were just discussing your impecuniousness and you're buying a slip for $1.19. Pennies.
We haven't come to the farm yet.
Well, we were just about to go back to the farm.
So where should I start?
We have now completed the entire story of both of your lives and gone all the way up to what was the most memorable life experience of your life. And we're now just about to have free-floating everything with one follow-up question that I will reveal to you later. But mainly, wait, what we just talking about?
The farm.
Oh yeah, yeah.
My mom was a kid.
Do you have on there about coming over on the boat?
Yeah, that's all on there.
That's all.
But
Where did I stop?
You stopped right after you bought your
Right
slip.
after you bought that slip for $1.19.
That was before I started talking about the farm.
No.
Grandpap at age
No.
12.
No.
You did Grandpap at age 12 and then you did the slip.
Yeah.
I did?
Yeah, you did.
We got Grandpap all taken care of.
Okay, but I wanted to, if
I don't believe that because we talked about the slip and then we only went to the farm and him coming on the steering boat. That was before that.
All right.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Was it really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, will you tell us again about him then?
Where should I? We went. The slip is on there, right?
Yeah, we got all that.
We got on the slip is definitely on there because we just watched it.
All right. Well, you were asking for memorable moments. I know we're retracing and plowing the same ground again, probably, but
Well, there
and
might be some.
disking it too.
There might be some unplowed clods that we haven't broken up yet. So let's go back.
Now
to
we'll
them.
go back to harrowing a little bit. I can't really think of any memorable moments. When I grew up, as a kid, we always had a lot of fun on the farm because the neighbor kids had ponies, we had a pony, and seems like we spent a lot of time just playing in the daytime and riding ponies, and we always had little chores to do, but nothing too much. Mainly we had to stay out of the way of more important chores. And
Stay out of whose way?
the men, the working group.
Uh-huh. And what did you do to stay out of the way?
Well, just kind of, we played and so forth. You wouldn't play in the barn or anything like that. We weren't allowed to do that.
Uh-huh.
And we had sand piles and swings and later on bikes, and we would improvise little bridges. You like today they'd call it a Papa Willie, I guess, but little humps and bridges with bikes, and I would take and then as I got older, take a sharp stick and make hopscotch, and everything was homemade as far as what kind of games we played or anything like that. And there was always a large group of like I said, cousins would come and stay for weeks at a time, and maybe 2 months.
Like Marge and Rose.
And the highlight of every summer was always the Butler Fair, the Saxonburg Parade, the Fireman's Parade, and Carnival following, and thrashing. Those were the 3 highlights of the summer, and they would always come for those big times. And
Okay, tell me about one of those.
well, the Saxonburg Parade was just everybody from anywhere around there went to it.
Why? Was it for the 4th of July?
No, it was just each town had its own parade. There was a parade every week someplace, but the Saxonburg was the biggest. It was absolutely, unequivocally the biggest parade, and everybody went, and then they'd go to the carnival afterwards, which was like a Butler Fair, and nobody really, no other place really had any kind of a carnival fair like they did. And thrashing was always big because it was always set up ahead of time, and about 20 minutes to 8 in the morning you could hear the thrasher come in the lane, and Crummie's thrasher. And then all the men would come from all the surrounding farms, and Wetzel was always there. And
You've got to talk about Wetzel for a minute. Come on.
Just Walter Wetzel?
Here and there.
Tell them about Walter
And
Wetzel.
they'd come and they'd thrash, and the women, usually there would even be other ones you'd bring in to help, and would start to cook early in the morning for lunch. It was like a feast.
Could Wetzel
And
eat?
then always had benches and wash basins out in the yard for them to wash up, and cakes of soap and towels. They didn't go in the house to wash, and they'd slap water in their face and soap up and all that stuff. And they washed up out there, and then, you always had one or two big tables set up.
Okay, now tell these grandchildren
then
who are
the
listening to
evening
this why
meal
you
was the
had
same
the
way.
thrasher.
Yeah, but wait, you gotta tell them about Walter Wetzel,
Well,
how
Walter
he ate.
Wetzel lived on the road, on the Glade Mill Road, and he was somewhat retarded, and he was a farmhand.
But he could eat like a
You could
champ.
always stop the night before and ask him to come and help the next day, and he'd always be there. And he loved to come to our farm because he always got lots to eat, and at home he probably had nothing more than coffee and bread. And he would just eat and eat and eat until you'd think, you know, where does this go to? And he was always in a hurry. But we'd always try to get him to eat. When Mom and Annie, he liked them, and when he'd go past the house, he'd always go up through the field and over there. And they'd say, "Come on in, Walter," and he'd say, "I'll chance it." And he'd come in and eat, and he always put his thumb down in the bowl when he passed the bowl, or his thumb right in the pitcher, pouring part of the pitcher. And you got so after a while that you always more or less did these things for him, so he didn't have his hands in the food. But he would just eat, and he'd put meat on his plate and potatoes on top of that, and then corn or succotash and vegetables and jello and gravy on top of that. Everything was like a big haystack. and he would eat the whole thing, would just gobble it up. And usually he would fill his pockets with as much as he could take home.
Funny.
And sometimes, well, he always did get $2 a day pretty much, and maybe later 5 or 10 or even 15, but as soon as he got home, he didn't want to give him too much, because as soon as he got home, Floyd, his brother, took his money away. And
Yeah.
Floyd kept all his money underneath the chicken coop down there in jars, quart jars. And so Walter, more or less, he had a place to lay his head at night in the house, but he pretty much lived around those chicken coops down at the
He lived in the
Wetzel
chicken
place.
coops?
Pretty much. And at Christmas time, well, he spent all his time there. At Christmas time, we'd always go by and give him a bag of candy or a little.
Well, I remember when we were kids,
Something
we
to
would
eat.
drive down that road, and you would stop the car and lean out and hand him a box of donuts.
Yeah, he was always real friendly.
And
But his eyes went in different directions. You never knew which eye he was looking at you or not. But he was quite an eater, but he loved to come up to the farm because he always got lots to eat, and he got his pockets just as much as he could carry home with him. And he'd usually eat it before he got home, or Floyd would get it.
Now, tell these grandchildren who are going to be watching this what thrashing was all about.
Thrashing was when this big piece of farm equipment, pulled by a tractor, came in the lane and set up in the barn, and the grain, wheat, oats, was brought in there in the sheaf, I guess you'd call it, right? On wagons,
horse-drawn wagons.
horse-drawn, later tractors, and the men would feed the sheaves into the thrasher, and then the thrasher would separate the straw, which was for cattle bedding, and the wheat, which went into the granary, or the oats, whichever it was.
But every farm had to rent this big piece of machinery and get all their neighbors to come help.
Right. It was a ritual, a tradition. It was the way it was done in those days.
Because nobody had a combine.
Right. And then in the around September, the same thing was done for silo filling, which was when the corn was brought in and fed into the ensilage cutter, so that it could go up the chute into the silo, and that's what the cows ate all winter long.
And one of the neat things for Mom and me is that what goes on in Holmes County now is just like what we saw when we were kids.
Holmes County, you mean Amish country?
Yeah, in the Amish country, they still use old-fashioned binders to cut wheat and have threshing machines, and it's the same thing. It's, 50 years later, it's just like it was when we were kids.
But when I grew up, we shocked wheat, and I can remember helping to shock wheat too. And you'd always have to wear something long sleeve, because in the top, when you would kind of break, put it over the top.
Spread it out and put it on
And,
top.
With shock wheat, you mean put several sheaves together to make a little stack?
Yeah, you put one, and then you build around it, and then there was one on top that you had to crack,
Can you remember how many?
so it would go down over, kind of like a roof.
To cover it from the rain.
And the field was full of those, and then corn was shocked too. But that's the way the grain was done, the way it is now on the Amish farms. But then,
I'll
you
bet
know,
you
those
can't
were the-
remember how many sheaves go into a
oh,
shock.
I don't remember.
I can't either.
Maybe 9. I don't know. But
Yeah,
that's
about it.
more or less the way it was done then. But we played a lot and had fun. And every night almost we would play kick the can, or else we'd sing and play at the piano.
Well, tell me about Elsie and the piano.
Well, I'm not there yet. And then, but then as time went on, we had to help in the field too. I can remember at age 9 helping to hoe. Had my own hoe. Had to hoe corn. We didn't have a
You had your own hoe?
corn cultivator. Had to hoe fields of corn. Certain days went after rain, for instance, that was maybe a day that you'd have to hoe. And, everybody would have their row. And it was, everybody was in the field hoeing on one particular day at a time. And then, like I said, we used to have to straw tomatoes, pick tomatoes. And when I got older then, I was able to help drive the truck through the tomato field, and that was a big treat. I like nothing better than come home from school, get off the school bus, change my clothes, grab a big ginger cookie, and then know that I had to drive that truck. I just loved to drive that
Why
old
was that
truck
so
through
great?
the field.
Why was that
It
so
was
great?
just fun to be able to do that.
Is that the same old truck that...
Between stops while they loaded.
Was that the same old truck that they used on the farm
It's
when we
still
were
there,
kids?
I'm sure, yeah.
And that's the one that ran down Sophie's Hill and the brakes went
Yeah.
out when Ed was driving it?
Still there. And then also, when
About a 1941 Chevrolet.
46.
46?
When we put up hay, I used to have to walk behind the hay loader with the little 3-pronged fork. That was my job too when I got to be about 10 or 12. Whatever was left around the bend, around the corner of the field, I had to fork it, put it up on the loader. Somebody always had to walk behind the loader, which was a big thing, where the hay, it picked up the hay with teeth, and that went into the wagon which somebody built.
Uh-huh.
And every once in a
They
while,
built loose hay.
Yeah, loose hay.
the hay would come down, and there would be a black snake coming down with it. I can remember that.
So then when you got up to the barn, it had to be put up in the mow, and there was this big fork. Didn't look like a fork, but it was called a hay fork. It had a big point down, like a clamp, and they would attach that. Everybody else would be up in the mow building.
Mhm. So you would drive
And somebody would be on the wagon, which was in the barn now.
So you drive the wagon into the barn,
And then I got to drive that tractor. The
into the
Oliver
barn.
was the one that did that. And it had to be precise.
So that's why you did it.
It was on this rope. The hay fork was attached to a rope on the front of the tractor, and you backed up. I mean, really slow.
Did they assign you to this because you were precise?
Yeah, I'd love to do that. Back up, but you'd never ask. You never ask if you could do it. If
Why?
you were called to do it, that was the greatest thing.
Oh.
You never ask. I can never remember anybody asking to do that, but it was almost like a privilege to be able to do that. But you just very, very slowly, and you know just exactly where to stop. And they would holler from the wagon, and you brake immediately. And then they would, by that time, the rope on the pulley from the tractor backing up had taken the big thing of hay on this fork over to the mow, and then we got to a certain place when you would stop, it would break.
What
And
would
it
break?
would fall in the
Actually,
fork would
there would be
open.
a trip rope that they'd pull.
They'd pull a rope from the wagon,
Yeah.
and the fork would open, then the hay went into the mow, then they built that.
Yeah.
Then you'd pull back in, and they'd bring the fork back down on the pulley and put it in another big clamp, a big thing like this table.
Uh-huh.
That was always fun. And then, until they got more modernized machinery. But those were pretty much the highlights. And then we'd go down to Sophie's and go to the creek. And we got silly road bikes. And
Were there ever any
In the
horses on the
yard.
farm when you were there?
yeah, there were horses.
What about Jackie Witzke riding Will's horse and it ran away with her? Was that
Well,
at your
that was
wedding?
after we were married. And
Yeah.
that was a long time after. All the before flavor. But anyhow, that was my time at the farm. And my granddad died 3 months before I was born. But as I started to say before, I came over from Germany at age 12. Well, this was on there, isn't it, already?
I think it is, but if you think it isn't, go ahead and repeat
Found
it.
his place where he was supposed to go in Pittsburgh, and then he got odd jobs, and later married Margaret Burkert, whom he knew in Germany.
And he called her Maggie.
He called her Maggie. Well, everybody called her Maggie. And those families knew each other before. And then later on, all the other Fritzes, his family came over in the Burkitts and so forth. They rented Ewalt's, and I think most of the 10 were born at Ewalt. And then moved to the present-day farm.
And he was 40 when he bought that. And great-grandma got sick shortly after that.
She got sick shortly after that, and they got the first telephone. I think we went over that. And then Annie raised the whole flock.
Mm-hmm.
And Elsie, but Elsie was 5 years old, to go back a little bit, before grandmother died there.
Mm-hmm.
Because she still can remember, they had a wheelchair from somewhere, how she used to walk back the road above the house there
Mm-hmm.
and hold on to that wheelchair.
Mm.
And let's see. Well, Grandpa, as I left
What did
off,
she have? Did she have tuberculosis?
she had
or
cancer.
What? No. What kind of cancer?
It was around the face some way.
Hmm.
I mean, I don't know where, but it had to do with her face.
Did she chew tobacco?
No,
Like jaw cancer or something?
I just really don't know. Nobody really ever seemed to know, but I know it was on her face.
No.
Grandpa Fritz, then he was left with those kids, and Annie was 19. Can you imagine? And a big mortgage on that farm. And everybody just kind of chipped in and helped. And from that time until the youngest ones, which probably were 6, 7, and 8, were grown, and he died, then it was nothing really but hard work. They'd take a horse and buggy to church and so forth, and he had the egg route in Pittsburgh, and he was a very infectious person, so I've heard.
Great-grandpa.
And he always had, I mean, I told you about how this drive he had, and he was always very organized and,
Mm-hmm.
and precise and particular and all that. And the people that, he always had a lot of friends that came out to the farm on weekends. Mostly Sundays, they'd come out and they'd stay all day
Mm-hmm.
and stay for supper and on into the evening, always ended their evening playing around the piano.
Mm-hmm.
And when the boys, my dad and Ed and George and Bill and the rest of them, were teenagers, when these people would come out from town in their, what would they have, Model A's or Model T's or whatever they had, they were very mischievous. And when these other people, these older friends, were in the parlor singing, they'd get in their cars, they always left the keys in the cars, and just tear around back on the field roads and everywhere. And then somebody, one of them would always be listening to see if they were still singing, and it's another verse, and go again, and just tear around. And they never seemed to know, except sometimes they questioned, you know, but nobody ever said anything because they noticed something was amiss. But the people that came out were always people that could do something for him. He would take pig blood to the shoemaker, and the shoemaker would fix all their shoes.
Mm-hmm.
He went, Bender was a good friend because, and he could come out because he could come about once a month with his scissors and hand clipper and cut everybody's hair up in the yard.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody could give him some service as well as he could give to them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the jeweler, he always bought the girls a piece of jewelry when they were confirmed, and church was a very big part of their lives. And the furniture store man and the grocer, they called him. And there was a purpose to everybody, that they could come and do something for him. But he had lots and lots of friends, and the place was just overrun with, you know. Now, I mean, I can remember when I grew up, people like, I would hear names like Mrs. Dunn and Old Weidler and Bender and just, you know, dozens of names. But these people were all friends from the egg route that he got to know, and he'd visit and spend, you know, Saturday was like a social outing when you're left with 10 kids and no wife. And
You mean Saturday
all the
when
money,
it was egg root?
right.
Uh-huh.
And all the money worries he had. And Emma was the only one that went to college. She went to Slippery Rock, and she got her first job teaching school, one-room school about a mile away, and she walked there every day over the hills, up over Jack Wilson's Hill, at the old, I forget the name of the school, but at the old school over there on Hawkins Road. And when she made $50 a month, and she turned that right over to help pay the mortgage.
How much a month?
50.
Hmm.
That's
That's
what
a
she
lot.
got for teaching.
It's almost as much as Dad made when he was an intern.
But lots of her brothers and
Resident.
so forth were in her class. They went to the school too.
Hmm.
And then then some of them, left and got married and so forth. But my dad and Ed and Annie stayed there. And then when, well, to go back a little bit, Grandpap was also like I said, very active in church. And this is something that's never supposed to be destroyed. He sang in the choir, and I don't know what else he did, but he counted the collection. He'd take all the envelopes home after church on Sunday and, get out of my way. And he would, so I've heard, he'd take all these envelopes, and he was very organized about opening them. He was the only one that could do it, counted the money and everything, and took care of it. He did that for years. And then the church gave him this little choir boy, I guess you call it. It's really a match holder, an ashtray and match holder. But this has been in the Fritz family. Everybody see this? Grandchildren, everybody? It's been in the Fritz family probably since in the 1920s.
So the church gave that to him.
The church gave it to him for all he had done for them. And strangely enough, it even looks like him. That choir boy looks like my grandpap Fritz, your great, and Adam, Katie, Dylan, and Allie,
Great.
great. So this is to be passed down, never destroyed as, what is this thing anyway? This is very valuable.
An heirloom, you mean?
Yes, it's not to be tossed out or thrown out or, You look at it today and wonder what it is, but that's what it's all about.
Huh.
And,
Well, you have a million other things from the farm.
Oh.
What else do you have from the farm?
Well, a lot of antiques and little stuff here and there.
Okay, well, I want to ask you about this picture over there.
But when Elsie was 5 years old and the other girls were a little older, he always saw to it that they got things, had the opportunity to do things that they could do. They had somebody come to the house to give the girls, he had somebody come to the house to give the girls piano lessons. And everybody did okay except Elsie would never cooperate with his piano teacher, and he would talk to her about Elsie was he didn't think the teacher didn't think that she would ever learn how to play the piano. She didn't do what she was supposed to do, and she lost interest, and so then they had a discussion. He did, her dad, and the piano teacher. They decided just to not give piano lessons to her for a while and let her go. And she's the one that turned out to be the best piano player of the whole bunch.
Well, tell us now about Elsie's piano playing.
Well, then she picked it up by ear, and she can.
So now she plays by ear. And tell
play
us
any
about
song.
Marjorie Merriweather Post.
Well, she played for Marjorie Merriweather Post.
In West Palm
Post
Beach.
Cereals in West Palm Beach. Actually, Post Mansion is in Palm Beach. She went there regularly for maybe 15
And
years.
she's played semi-pro, most of her adult life, semi-professional piano.
Still plays.
She's played for all the rich, famous royalty and everybody else who goes to Marjorie
Weddings,
Merriweather Post.
birthdays, hotel supper parties. Once she plays a song, she never forgets it, never misses
I mean,
a
she
beat.
played for royalty once, didn't she, at Post Mansion?
Probably, yeah, ambassadors and people like that.
That's what I heard. Okay, well, tell me about this
And,
picture. Are you ready to talk about this picture?
Well, I am, yeah. I want to mention a little bit about Sophie, though. Sophie lived down over the hill on Sophie Shear's farm. She was the daughter of the Shear family, naturally, but she was the one that I always heard about because they were dead, and she lived there herself. And the farm really wasn't all that farmable, but some of the fields were farmed by our farm, rented or whatever. But she did come up over there, that hill, daily, just to help out. If there was a baby born, in the Fritz family way back, and anytime there was a big bunch there, or anytime anybody needed help, Sophie would always come. And many times at night, if somebody was sick, she would have her own home remedy down at her house that she thought was so much better. And she was great for saying, "Ah, good." and then she'd get her lantern, and she'd go down over that
hoot?
hill in
Was she
the
German?
dark. Yes. 11, 12, as late as 1 o'clock at night to get some special kind of camphorated oil or some remedy that she thought was better than what they had. She'd go get it, and pretty soon they'd look way back there and they'd see her lantern come in again. There she was back, and she'd stay all night, and she was always there to help. But she was just a, a real good person.
Mhm.
And that was
Now,
something.
Tom, you better get up there and make sure we've got this in the picture. Won't
Now, the
go there.
Fritzes were always very superstitious people, and there might be something to that. In fact, I think there probably has to be. But when John, the one,
Uncle John. Your
Uncle John, my uncle, who was my dad's brother,
you? Right.
died at
Hi,
age
Dad.
19 of,
Between the horses' flanks.
Yeah, right here. This is it.
he died at age 19 of,
Right in there.
trying to think, it seems to me it was
Exactly there.
scarlet fever he had,
Uh-huh.
I think. He died. And
Sure wasn't diphtheria.
his funeral was there at the farm, as was my granddad's and my grandmother's too. And these horses were horses from the farm. In fact, their names are Sam, Bess, Bob, and Doll. And this was their team. And if you can see here between the horse's legs, it looks like the face of a boy.
Uh-huh.
And this picture's been copied so many times for various Fritzes, and one of them, probably Aunt Emma, who was very superstitious, always thought that that was John's ghost, and it does really look like him.
Uh-huh.
It really does look like him.
Do you remember Uncle John? Or is this what the
No,
pictures
he was
show?
dead before I was born.
Uh-huh.
But
But you've seen pictures of him.
I've seen pictures of him. It does really look like him. The Fritzes were always big on picture taking. I mean, the highlights of life. Picture taking, the girls always got a piece of jewelry for confirmation and the highlights of the church season, you might say. Not necessarily birthdays or Christmas, but any big thing that went on in church, they would get a piece of jewelry, like a bracelet or a pendant or something, of which I've still got some of them, and some of them are really very valuable.
Well, okay, what else about Emma's superstitions?
Okay, she
Anything?
was very superstitious. Just about everything from day to day. Just meanings of things that would happen. Birds fly a certain way, it means a certain thing. And if they get too close to the window, that means there's going to be a death and just things like that. Mary, she was superstitious too. In fact, when she lived in Mars, she said that one night when she was in bed, somebody knocked on her bedroom door. And she didn't answer it. She was scared and she didn't answer it. And then the person left. And she was sure that, there was something there.
Mm-hmm.
And
This is Mary when? When she was in the Mars home?
no, when she lived in Mars.
Mm-hmm.
And then once another Fritz incident was there was a tea kettle on the stove. And
Wait, this was Uncle Will.
yes, this was in more recent years. A tea kettle on the stove, and he went to work and realized he had left this tea kettle on and forgot about it.
Mm-hmm.
And got home, and the burner had been turned off,
Mhm.
and the tea kettle was off the burner, but the water was still hot. And also, one of his Great Danes would always go to that same house, go to the stairway and look up there every night at 7 o'clock and just bark and bark and bark, which was another strange thing. And also there was a picture that was in that house of a woman, just kind of an old-fashioned face picture. And once they, I guess, went out with the trash, and the dog carried on and couldn't figure out what the problem was, and happened to bring that picture back in, and the dog stopped barking. That
You
happened.
mean they'd accidentally thrown away the picture?
That's happened in 2 different places where the dog carried on, and once during moving, that picture was packed in a box to be loaded,
Mm-hmm.
and the dog did the same thing and just barked and ran around and was half crazy
Until they took the picture.
until that picture was brought back in again, and then the dog settled down.
Are we supposed to believe that?
So those are the superstitions in the Fritz family. but they always believed in ghosts and things like that.
Do you
And,
believe in ghosts?
I don't believe in ghosts, but I think there's something to some superstition. Because it seems like if you believe it, I mean, what happened? I mean, if it happens,
Uh-huh.
there has to be something there to it.
Uh-huh.
And let me see if I have anything else I want to say. But then when I was, I went to grade school and high school and graduated and went to CAP and so forth. And things pretty much went on just the same. Of course, it wasn't as fun as when I was younger. I wasn't there as much, but when Grandpa Fritz was there with the kids, he'd always ask whoever was around there to come in and eat. There were always a lot of people there, whether it was the feed man or the milkman who would come on in and eat. And there was never really anything to eat because they just had nothing except smoked hams and things in the smokehouse. So they'd go out and cut off a slab of that and fry it. And Annie would always tell Elsie or whoever was there to set the table at least. So they'd start to set the table and she'd mix up always some kind of dough food. Flour, they always had flour. Just mix up some dough and make dumplings or whatever. Pancakes, grimly. And they always had something to eat, but it was always just more or less just put together with dough and
What was that last thing, Grimbley?
grimly.
Is that like
Okay.
spatzel?
Grimly is a pancake that's chopped into bits and usually served with blackberries from the woods. Mix up the blackberries from the woods. And we had hired men from time to time, and there was always a flunky or two around that helped out that would stay there because they had no place to go. And we never locked doors or anything like that. Later on had automobiles, of course, when I was big enough to know anything. And I can remember riding in the rumble seat of one of those old antique cars, the antique now. And Annie was always the big matriarch of the whole family and took care of everybody and did all the cooking and all that. And
How much older was she than your father? He was one of the younger kids, wasn't he?
Probably 16 years older.
So she was basically like a mother to him.
Right,
Because he was 3 when his mother died.
Yeah. And then she had her stroke when we lived on Thackeray Avenue. And you kids were born by then. And she was probably the best friend that anybody ever had. And you kids always had a good time going over there to visit. And I think you learned a lot too. I know it was like slave driving sometimes, but I think everybody learned a lot. Everybody always had a job, but it was always like that from way back. Even when Elsie was a kid, she used to always say, Grandpa always had a job for anybody that came around, and the only way she could ever get away from him, if she saw him coming, she'd run and go in the closet and shut the door. He wouldn't bother her there. But there was always something you had to do if he saw you and you were idle. You always had to have a job. But you kids always had work to do too.
Oh, yeah.
But I think it really was good for you because I remember once when John came home from his job at Buckeye, and he was just, he had worked so hard, he had cramps, and he was a total mess after about 10 hours of mowing after being soft for the whole year. He said, I'll tell you one thing, Grandma Fritz would be proud of me today. So I think you kids probably learned a lot over there, even though at the time you didn't like it.
We liked it.
So, well, you didn't like to be working, you wanted to play.
Oh, yeah.
But those were, I think all that put together, to be able to see you enjoy what I enjoyed was probably memorable, very memorable. Kind of a complete circle. So I think that's all I have to say. That pretty much brings me up to the present time. You can see I have a very rich heritage.
Dad, you want to chase up any unexplored leads like Mom just did?
That's a hard act to follow.
Do you have a list like this?
No, I don't keep lists. But the one thing we haven't talked about at all is sports, and I'll make very brief mention of that, but Larry and I especially spent all of our young years really not getting enough sports. And the biggest arguments we always had with our dad was that he never could afford to buy us baseballs and ball gloves and whatever. And I got really good at recovering a baseball with black electrical tape. And Larry and I just played ball all the time. And then eventually, of course, we both ended up being not great athletes by any stretch of the imagination, but it was really important to us both to play sports in high school and college. And
Well, didn't Larry get recruited by somebody?
oh yeah, he was a good athlete. We were as different as night and day. I was fast and mean, and he was talented. I played football and ran track, and he was a baseball and basketball player, and he was a very, very good pitcher. And in fact, good enough that Detroit wanted to sign him.
The Detroit farm team, you mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Uncle Doug was a pretty good catcher. In fact, they used to, in the summer leagues here in Columbus, they were, Larry would pitch and Doug would catch, and they were pretty good. Larry would be, some of those summers, be 10-0 in the summer leagues. And we had a good time in high school and the Capitol in sports. In fact, I think we were probably the only, we must have been the only three brothers who were captains of three different sports at Bexley High School.
Not at the same time.
No, we were a little. I was a captain of the football team, and Larry of basketball, and Doug of baseball.
Huh.
But my experiences don't match that tremendous Fritz farm. Nothing like that.
Okay, the last question comes from Susan. Define success.
Now that sounds like something a retail manager would come up with, a trick question.
No, that's really, that's the simplest question you've asked
No.
in all this. The success is that your kids are happy. I mean, that's the, when you're young, you want your kids to grow up to be senators or great professors, but as you mature a little bit, you realize that the most you could wish for anyone is that they are happy, and that's, I think if your children are happy, you've been a success. We're still working toward that.
Mom?
Well, I think that's true. I mean, we've had a lot of ups and downs, but something good has always come of it, I think. And no problems, let's say. I mean, really bad social problems like a lot of people have today with families.
You're sure about that?
I mean, mostly it's just stumbling blocks along the way and challenges, always new challenges. But one thing I think, what was the question again?
How do you define
how do you
success?
define success?
I think one of the most successful things about, well, our four kids, you and Doug and Tom, or John and Susan, is the fact that you kids are very strong kids.
How
And
so?
I
What do you
think
mean?
that is success.
How do you mean strong?
Well, I just think that
here's how-
you are made of strong stuff.
Okay, here's how we'll close up. Go through and say one strength of each of your kids. Go through the Doug, Tom, Susan, John. One strength of each one of them. That's how we'll close.
Well, I think the strengths of all four of you, or of each one of you, is kind of similar one to another in a way. To me, it's that your makeup. I think each one of you is a very strong individual. It's the backbone that you're made with. As far as just strengths, I think Doug has got that persevering drive and goals, and he is able to challenge other people enough so that he is challenged and he keeps on until he meets those goals, and that's a very strong strength as far as getting ahead, and he just is not at all intimidated by anything. And I think Susan has had a lot of things that have been stumbling blocks to her, but I think that she's got a lot of strength and courage, and confidence, which I think a lot of it with all four of you is the fact that you all had a good education and good background and good training. And even with all the downfalls she's had, I think there are nothing but good things ahead for her.
Mhm.
And you've had a lot of hard things to deal with in your life, but yet I think you keep bouncing right back each time, and I think you too are an exceptional individual. And John has had a lot of discouraging moments, but I've just prodded him on, and I'm just as proud as I can be of him.
Anything to add, Dad?
She's done it all.
Is that it?
That's it.
Okay. Thank you very much. That closes this story time.
Nissan